Hello everyone and welcome to Life Groups once again. Tonight we're in Psalm 18. It's a long psalm, there are 50 verses, so it might be that you've read it already. It might be that you have it open in front of you. Well, if not, then make sure you look at it after we finish. I'm not going to read the verses tonight, just the first three you'll be happy to know. Let's look at the scriptures then. David said, I love you, Lord, my strength. The Lord is my rock, my fortress, and my deliverer. My God is my rock in whom I take refuge, my shield and the horn of my salvation, my stronghold. I call to the Lord who is worthy of praise, and I have been saved from my enemies. From a young age, I've been blessed by hearing believers sharing their personal testimony of how they became a Christian and the way that God had worked in their lives, the things that they've experienced in God since that time. Personal testimony is just the sharing of an individual story, and the church I was brought up in liked to have a regular testimony time as part of their normal church service program. And some people would be able to recount dramatic incidents, special experiences of God's grace and his goodness and his keeping power. And I love to hear the stories. The only problem for me was that at a young age, I knew that I was saved. I knew that I'd been forgiven. I knew that I was part of God's family. But I never thought that my story was dramatic enough to be interesting for anyone else to hear. It wasn't until my teenage years that I began to realize that everyone who has been saved by the Lord, who've had their lives changed by the power of God, have a wonderful story to tell, because that was a miracle. It was a miracle of God's love and God's grace and God's mercy and God's forgiveness. And now, after following the Lord for many years, I can look back on life and I can reminisce how the Lord has changed my life, how he's helped me in so many ways, how he's guided my pathways through both difficult and pleasant places, how he's rescued me from certain danger, how he's brought touches of his healing to my body. And he's the one who's always been there for me, a faithful God. Why am I saying these things when we are supposed to be looking at Psalm 18? Well, that's what the psalm is all about. It's David's personal testimony of God's goodness and his greatness and his faithfulness to him throughout all of his life. And when David first spoke these words, he was an old man looking back on the events that had marked out his life. The historical setting can be found in 2 Samuel 22, where the original words were recorded there. It was actually a time near to the end of his life, and it might even have been the last psalm that he composed. He had made it big. From being a fugitive to now being the king of an established throne, and he had fulfilled God's purposes for him. The previous king, Saul, who was the bane of his life for 20 years, had died, and David now had succeeded him as king and had brought about a unity to that kingdom which had once been split. The troubles that he'd had once struggled with in his own family had now been settled. His authority was accepted. He had been respected by all of his people. Even the nations who were once his enemies were at peace with him and honoured him. And they looked on him as a mighty warrior and a great king. He had made it at last. And as he reflects on his life, these words of testimony flow out of him. Primarily they were spoken to the Lord, but they were later to be added to the nation's catalogue of psalms. As I said, it's a long psalm, it's 50 verses. Only 3 other psalms are longer. But if David had tried to record all of the specific life incidents, it would have taken up a whole book in itself. And so instead he gives a general overview of some of the crucial times that he had relied on God for help and to be delivered, and for God to intervene and God to take him through. David had certainly not had an easy life. But with his poetic ability, he uses picturesque language and descriptive imagery to tell not only of his lifetime struggles, but also of the awesome working of God on his behalf. The way that God had come to his aid, it was dramatic. God's intervention had ranged from the simple to the spectacular, using natural and supernatural means. And as David had kept faith in God, God had always proved his faithfulness to David. And then he concludes his testimony with a beautiful summary of praise to the one who'd enabled his life to be fulfilled. And you might think that out of his success, he would have been tempted to have sung something of the lines of Frank Sinatra's song, I Did It My Way. But no, for David it was God did it his way. And in verse 49 he says, I will praise your name among the nations. In other words, I'll make you known wherever I go, whoever I speak to. You are going to be the God who takes all the glory. And I will sing praises to you. How appropriate, after recalling the ways of his life, to lift up his praise to the one who had made it all possible. So now we've given a general overview of the content of David's testimony in this Psalm 18. I'd like to bring us back now to the starting 3 verses that we read at the beginning. And what a way to start a story. He says, I love you, Lord. You get the sense of David's overwhelming joy in God as he begins his personal story with these precious words of, I love you, Lord. The actual word that's used for love here indicates that it comes from the deepest depths of his being. It was not spoken from a head knowledge of God, but rather from a positive relational experience of God. And God is so pleased when we voice our individual love for him, when it comes from a genuine heart. His love for us is unconditional, but he desires us to love him in return. In Matthew 12:30, Jesus said, the greatest commandment was to love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, with all of your strength. And here David is doing just that. He's loving God with a passion that comes from his whole being. And although God knew all about David's heart, David needed to tell him personally. I wonder how often do we take time to simply tell God that we love him. David then continues with a number of descriptions of what God had been to him. And in just 2 verses, he 9 times says, you are my everything. Without you in your life, I am nothing. He says, you are my strength. Strength comes from knowing God intimately and having a relationship with him. This is a very important aspect of spiritual life, wanting to spend time with God and desiring to know him more. So that even when trials come and battles happen, when we feel weak in our own resources, we are still able to draw strength from the Lord. And out of relationship comes joy, and the joy of the Lord is our strength, as Nehemiah 8 verse 10 tells us. In verse 32, David openly confesses that he had no strength of his own. It was God who had equipped him with strength. Then he says, you are my rock. In fact, he mentions it twice. And knowing the tremendous advantage the rocks and crags and hills and caves and crevices had afforded to him, in the many times that he'd been a fugitive and been hunted for his life, they had covered him. They had hidden him. They'd stabilized him. They protected him. And he says to God, you are my rock in troubled times. You are the one who hides me. You're the one who covers me. You are the one who shelters me. You're the one who protects me. You're the one who provides a firm foundation for my life. And an old Christian hymn pops into my mind, Rock of Ages, cleft for me, let me hide myself in thee. He says, you are my fortress, a castle on top of a sheer cliff face, a safe refuge where I'm held secure above the threats that come against me. Friends, in the strong arms of the Lord, I can feel secure and find rest and safety. He says, you are my deliverer. Whatever affliction I had to pass through, you have provided a way of escape. When I thought all was lost, when I thought I was a goner, you have rescued me. And you are my God. You are the Almighty One, the God of the universe, and yet you've joined yourself to me. You are my personal God. You are mine, and I am yours forever. You've proved yourself and shown yourself to be a father, a protector, a helper, a friend. And you are my shield. As in the natural battles, my trusted shield has guarded both my head and my body. So too, as a spiritual shield, you have guarded my heart and my mind by faith in your word. When I've had to face the lies of those against me, and when I've been troubled by my own thoughts and emotions, and when I've been attacked by the fiery darts of the devil, you have been my protection. You have answered me. You have quenched the flames. You have covered me. You are the shield for my heart and mind. You have been my cover and always will be. And you are my salvation. In fact, your salvation is the very peak of safety. For whatever I've been through, and whenever I've gone through difficulties, and whatever life has thrown at me, it is the remembrance of your salvation that has lifted me up to the mountain tops again. I am saved only in you. And then lastly he says, you are my stronghold. Again we have that imagery of an impregnable castle with high towers. It presents a place where I can run to and know that I am kept. From the vantage point of the towers, I can see the enemy approaching from a distance, which gives me time to draw on God's strategy before any attack takes place. And the tower was also a storehouse for the castle. And so even if I'm under siege, I have access to resources that will sustain me. And from the height, I can look down on the futile, frustrated attempts of the enemy to get at me. And that's what Proverbs 18 verse 10 reminds us of. It says, the name of the Lord is our strong tower, and the righteous can run into it and are saved. So having told God of his love for all that God had meant to him, he summarizes it all by verse 3 with, I call to the Lord, who is worthy of praise. So have I been saved from my enemies. It's as if David is singing one of our worship songs again. My life is in you, Lord. My strength is in you, Lord. My hope is in you, Lord. It's only in you. I'll praise you with all of my life. I'll praise you with all of my strength. All of my hope is in you. And as Pastor Dale has recently shared with us, God wants to be in close relationship with us and for us to enjoy him. Let's appreciate him as our God, as our strength, as our fortress, as our deliverer, as our shield, as our stronghold from the troubles of life. To David, those terms were very familiar. They had been part of his experience. For us, those terms might not be so familiar, but we certainly understand what they stand for. More than all of that, though, he is our Saviour. Pastor Dale also encourages us to think of times that God has helped us and guided us and guarded us. And so may I also suggest something else. When you think of those things, why not just jot them down in a notebook? You don't need to put them into any time order. Just jot them down as you think about them. But it can be your personal encouragement book. And when you feel a little discouraged, you'll be able to go back and look and be blessed and record what God has done. And it will strengthen your faith for him to do it again. David's remembrance gave testimony of God's unfailing love, of his goodness to him. And they were all written down, and since that time, countless numbers of people have been blessed by them. And your jottings, maybe just the help you need if you feel you can be brave enough sometime in the future to share your testimony, your personal story with your church family. They will be blessed, and I certainly will be. I conclude tonight's thoughts by something I recently listened to. It was a Lauren Daigle song called Trust in You. And there was one verse that caught my attention as being so appropriate to what we've been considering from Psalm 18 here tonight. These are the words as she sang. You are my strength and comfort. You are my steady hand. You are my firm foundation, the rock on which I stand. Your ways are always higher. Your plans are always good. There is no place where I'll go that you've not already stood, and I will trust in you. Let's tell God we love him. Let's thank him for all his goodness and his faithfulness. And let's continue to trust him with our future. And may our personal testimony be, the Lord was in it all of the way. Good night. God bless you.